Oh, it actually worked. Wonderful. I like my fun, fancy backgrounds, but I also really like the video quality I get through just straight YouTube live streaming. So it's just really easy to just go live and that's it. Anyway, God, I am really excited that this is working again. So I had you guys thinking a little bit about some like topics that you would like to follow in the modern developing world, right? So I should be going and following up on those in the actual discussion forums. I'm really behind on grading stuff in the discussion forums. I've been basically just trying to catch up and get all the grading done for this week because I just had major projects all come due for every single one of my classes, which is pretty good because I'm on schedule, even though I lost a whole week with a COVID scare. In any case, it's going to take me a while to catch up on all those. So all of your participation grades should get a huge bump this week as I catch up on that. That being said, I've been talking to you a lot about information, a lot about information diet, a lot about research. Now, we are going to have to superimpose some extra layers of complexity onto this. But before we do that, I kind of want to send you guys out into the Wild West of the internet in order to bring out some fun kind of very loose information gathering processes. Now, I can actually show this book now that I don't have a background in the back. This is the book that I use to talk about the power browsing stuff. And I actually talked a great deal about some other research methods in here. And it was like the height of my career was talking about environmental scanning and like the future of academic research. And looking back on it, I read the paper the other day, or the chapter in this sense, and I was like, ew, that's bad, David. Young David was very idealistic and lame. But a lot of the ideas still kind of hold true. Good information diets are based upon a prolonged consumption of information over a set amount of time. Once you've done that, you can kind of acclimate yourself to operating within a wider conversation. And I was just talking with my 1101 class about this very same thing. Research information participates in a conversation. We are having a discussion about topics that are going on right now in the real world. The most common example of these conversations is politics. In politics, we're trying to solve problems. We're trying to find solutions. We have disagreements. We have factions form. And then those factions vie for control, right? That is the basis of the conversation that is being unrolled. Now, you guys don't necessarily have to go to a political conversation. In fact, I would imagine most of you won't want to go in that direction. That's something that not a lot of people really enjoy, right? Because it's contentious. And there's a lot of anxiety with talking about political topics. So what you can do instead is you go back and you think a little bit about what you want to learn more about. There's a lot of really interesting branches out there. What I want you to do is I want you to start thinking about where you get your information from. No matter what your topic is, there is a way to get very updated information about it, right? Now, very current information often goes outside the realm of what we call scholarly information, because scholarly information is very, very slow. And don't worry, we're going to talk about that later. I kind of want to step into that after getting you acclimated to like the Wild West of information. Really current stuff has a tendency to have a lot of bumps and bruises on it. So let me give you some examples of very current conversations going on right now in the world, and where you might go to find some examples of this. The one that stands out the most in my mind is COVID-19. But COVID-19 is a little bit broad. So the coronavirus has massively impacted the way that we live our lives, and has really changed a lot of the assumptions that we make about how we're going to interact with each other. A lot of people are very starved for human interaction. And for me, one of the things I've been absolutely fascinated with as I consume social media and as I read and watch news is where is sports going? Where is entertainment venues going? In regard to the general health of the people who patronize those types of things. I recently saw an advertisement for a film that was very, very forward in the fact that it's time to return to the theater. When I heard that, I had a chill go down my back. I was like, I don't want to go to the theater yet, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I really want to go to the theater when the movie Dune comes out in December, but it still makes me kind of uncomfortable to think about that. I believe right now, and this is kind of an interesting one, I think WrestleMania is going to have a live audience. I don't know what that audience is going to look like. I don't even know off the top of my head where WrestleMania even is this year. I don't know if you guys have noticed this about me, but I'm a pretty big wrestling fan, right? So I've been very anxious with how wrestling is being delivered right now. WWE has kind of sort of gone back and forth with, they had small live audiences. They had no live audience for a long time. And then recently they went to this format called the Thunderdome. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, okay? I know this is like, aren't we supposed to be learning about Ryan? Why are we talking about wrestling? But just bear with me for a minute. The Thunderdome is actually a stage in a field that has this massive wall of television screens of some type where people get to stream their faces in to give it the appearance of a very large live crowd. Well, not very large, but there's an audience watching the event. It was actually really interesting to see. So they actually went from no live audience. They brought in a small audience that was masked, and then they went to a gigantic streamed audience. It was as strange as it is, it was a very clever way of playing it. I got to give WWE props for putting this thing together. I've actually really enjoyed seeing the way that they kind of approach these problems. So I'm very interested to see if WrestleMania will have a live event, right? I'm very interested to see if they follow through with that. So look at what I've done there. I've taken a conversation about COVID-19 and I've made it about sporting events and I've made it about wrestling. That's the type of kind of simultaneous broadening of a topic and narrowing, right? I'm looking at the broad topic of COVID-19, but I'm also looking at the way that it's affecting a very small industry. Now, to step away from that for a minute, we can also be interested about, and one of the big conversations that bubbles up around wrestling has to do with which stars are going to receive the push. Who is the big star? Who's going to get the merchandise? Who's going to become the face of the company? And this kind of replaces, because with wrestling, I'm going to do this whole lecture about wrestling if I'm not careful. The thing is, it actually illustrates the point really well. Wrestling is obviously predetermined, right? It's entertainment. These people are not trying to murder each other. It's staged. But and I believe there's this big thing right now on Twitter. I need to talk about social media a little bit because we can use this in this assignment. There's a big thing on Twitter right now. Soulja Boy has apparently come out and talking about WWE being fake. Like, yeah, everybody knows that. It's not fake, it's staged, right? But in any case, rather than talking about wrestling in terms of who's stronger, who's going to win, the way that we talk about it with like regular football, or like soccer or any other actual competitive sport, it's about who's going to maneuver themselves, who has the charisma to actually become a true driving star. Who's the next big thing, right? For me, conversations about what is going on in the world right now typically revolve around things like predicting the future, trying to find the next big thing, looking at trends, and trying to find the thing that's going to, be the next big item, right? Now, I don't want you guys necessarily to think just about that as you go into your topics, but here's some other examples. This is a process called futuring. Now, futuring is kind of a bit of a magical thinking kind of way of looking at the world and gathering information, because we don't know what the future holds for an industry or a topic, right? We can't predict the future, but in a lot of ways we can try. And the attempt to predict the future can be a lot of fun, right? So let's get away from wrestling for a minute. As much as I love wrestling, it could go on and on and on about wrestling for an English lecture. Let's talk about cars. This is another one of the big things that my article was about when I wrote in the collection over there. I was really into the idea of the self-driving car about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, a self-driving car was very, very outside of the realm of possibility. And when I would talk about the inevitability of the self-driving car, people would look at me like I was crazy, right? They really thought that I was out of my mind, that I was reading all sorts of weird, strange, almost conspiracy theory stuff. There was no way a self-driving car was even possible back then. But after looking at all the articles and all the stuff that was being written in computer science and looking at what was possible in the automotive industry, the prediction that people were making about the self-driving car actually came to fruition. It's not proliferating quite as widely or as quickly as they were saying, but it is here, right? So I've actually been on the lookout for the self-driving car for years and years and years. And when it finally started to come around and people were like, oh my God, I was like, I told you. You're not always going to experience that type of thing when you're trying to predict the future, though. There's a lot of wrestlers that I've had my eye on, and I'm like, that guy's going to be big. And then, they sort of fizzle out. So again, getting away from the wrestling metaphor, you can do a kind of rough futurism for all sorts of different topics. We can go from celebrity gossip. This one's a little depressing. Like, which hot couples are going to make it more than 10 years in their marriage before something terrible happens to them? A lot of celebrity couples simply just don't last. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. Who's going to be a big star coming up? Who is the up and comer? Who is someone to watch? Who's going to flame out, right? We can do this with a lot of artists. We can do this with musicians. And this is, again, I got to be careful, but The Weeknd. I did not know anything about The Weeknd before the Super Bowl. And I watched the Super Bowl and I saw that halftime show. He's kind of awesome. Like, I've really been listening to a lot of The Weeknd because I was introduced to him. Somebody, somewhere, knew that The Weeknd was going to be big, and they pushed him, and they probably made a great deal of money off of that, right? There's a reason he performed at the Super Bowl, is because he had the power to put together a show that actually, would work and would probably bring in even more people like me who was like, oh, that's kind of cool, right? You don't necessarily have to go. Again, the point I'm trying to make here is this conversation can go in a lot of different places rather than just kind of like political stuff. Finding the next big person, predicting who will crash and burn, what kind of technology is around the corner, right? Now, I've already talked a little bit about, the coming game console wars. What is the future for a handheld gaming console, and how will that compete with things like games on phones? Are phones going to take even more of the share as to what PC and gaming consoles have? That could go either way, right? And the point I'm trying to make with all this is you notice that I'm taking these very broad topics. I'm trying to drill down to something very, very specific, right? But before you can do that, you have to consume a great deal of information, and you have to find it coming from a whole bunch of different sources. Now, a lot of where these sources are going to come from is going to depend upon the actual topic that you choose. Where do we go to get information about these topics, right? It can be websites. It can be magazines. But it can also be social media. For me, as an avid consumer of news, one of the greatest sources of information that I have right now is Twitter. Now, Twitter, there's a lot of problems with Twitter, and Twitter is a great disseminator of all sorts of different fountains of knowledge. I used to require students bring me a list of websites that brought information regarding their topics, but you could probably get away with just building a Twitter account, going onto Twitter and typing the topic that you're interested in into the search bar and seeing what comes up. Twitter has a real ability to bring you influencers of a topic rather quickly when you go and search the topic, right? It prioritizes the larger and more influential figures. So a Twitter account could be very useful for this, but you could always go to Google and go to Google News as well. I should link these. Google News will do something very similar, but rather than bringing you right straight up conversation about it, because Twitter is very oriented to actual like conversations that are sort of bubbling, Google's going to bring you actual articles, and it's going to bring you stuff that's has a little bit more polish and edge to it. So what I want you to start doing, what I want you to start building is a grouping of sources around the topic that you've chosen. And I want you to start gathering stories, and I want you to start, I got a hair in my mouth, ew. I want you to start gathering information. I don't necessarily want you to form an opinion about it. That can be very hard, especially, as we are reading information, as we're taking stuff in, it's our natural instinct to just start forming an opinion about what it is we're consuming. But I want you to resist that urge as much as you possibly can. So we're going to start writing something I call data reports. And you're going to post these in the discussion forum once a week. I'm going to have even more discussion posts to go and look at, which is okay, right? So all of these are going to build up together into a wider paper later. But hi, how are you? I can't decide whether I've had too much caffeine or not enough. Simply just, right? Anyway, probably too much. Now, what I want you to do for this week's information report is I want you to get online, take your topic, and if you want to change it, you can, but you need to go ahead and lock something in, okay? I want you to take the topic that you've chosen, and I want you to bring me some sources of it. Not bring me, but I want you to write like maybe 3 nice full paragraphs, well, as close to 10 sentences as you can get. Give me 3 full paragraphs about what you're seeing, the sources that you will use, the things that you will check along over the next couple of weeks in order to write about this topic. Now, again, these don't necessarily have to be the most trustworthy sources, as long as we learn to recognize untrustworthy sources, right? But you can go out and see the conversation. This is to try to figure out what are people talking about with this topic. The one that I'm most interested in, I want somebody to write about fashion, because I have no understanding of how fashion behaves or operates. I am apparently so paralyzed on fashion that I'm like literally a walking circus everywhere I go. I don't know what it is. Like people just immediately are like, wow, that guy's completely out of touch with everything that, is fashionable in the world. It's quite embarrassing, but that's just, what can I say? That's my lot in life. So that's pretty much all I want you to do for this week. We're going to keep the format for this pretty simple. Write me 3 paragraphs, choose your topic, and tell me where you'll find information. You can use Twitter. You can use Google News. If you find something else, let me know where that's coming from, because I'm interested to see what you guys might do to get information beyond those 2 sources. There's more than that. But for those of you who are not the most internet savvy, those are the 2 things. You can create a Twitter account, or you can go to Google News and use that. I don't know if it's possible to search Twitter without an account. Look that up for me. Is it possible to look and see what's going on Twitter without an account? I always log in, so I haven't ever seen it. But writing and using social media is kind of a good thing to practice in a writing classroom, because that's actually kind of one of the ways that most people write and establish themselves these days. So I don't want to directly require that you create the account, but it'd be a pretty good idea just to see what's going on in the topic that you've chosen. In any case, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. This was a long one, and I'm going to start really ramping up the demands. You're going to have a lot more to do. I'm going to start giving points based upon you participating in these kind of these more arduous conversations that will take place in the discussion forum. So that's what I want you to do this week. Think of that topic and start telling me where your information is going to come from and what you're seeing. Just give me an idea of what's going on in that world right now. I'm going to leave it there, and thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. I'm so happy YouTube works again. Go away.